we are delighted to welcome Basil Dillon-Malone to UCD to talk to us about his experiences in UCD. And Basil is a UCD engineering alumnus. He was here in the 1960s, and it's a wonderful opportunity for myself as Dean of Engineering and for the college to hear what it was like to be an engineering student here at that time. But I think we might start with looking at your career, and that career started with choosing UCD engineering. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what motivated you to study engineering and why here in UCD.
Thank you for having me, Aoife. First of all, on my career, the first 12 years I spent with General Electric. General Electric USA recruited at Merrion Street, UCD, each year between 1967 and 1970. They took over the top floor of the Gresham Hotel, a team of 6 from a corporate in New York. And it was quite a sight to see this group coming into Merrion Street every day for a week. In 1970, the supersonic jet was cancelled in Seattle with 50,000 engineers out of work. NASA laid off another 70,000 about the same time. It was the last time that GE came to Ireland. So I was part of the last group, of whom there are probably about 20 of us scattered around the United States right now. Many returned to Ireland. It was natural that I went to UCD for a number of reasons. My cousin, Kevin Maloney, was the chief engineer at the Pigeon House, ESB, so I used to converse frequently with Kevin. At the same time, I also conversed frequently with a cousin of mine, Paddy Dillon-Malone, who ran the MBA program at Trinity. And Paddy was very strong on the subject that there is no better career than one in technology to go into business.
Okay.
So I was focusing on the business world right from the get-go. Another part that impacted me at the time was the subject of this melting pot. I had read Cardinal Newman's definition of a university as a melting pot, a place where people, students, come together, interact together, debate, learn from each other. Yes. And I saw that application, actually, Aoife, a few years in my third year in engineering, where I was a member of the IESTA, International Association for Exchange of Students for Technical Experience Abroad, with Philips R&D Medical in Eindhoven in the Netherlands. We had 52 students from 12 countries working together, and part of the curriculum was not just working in the labs during the day, but each night we had a current affairs debate in groups of 6 or 8.
Okay.
So it was a great way to learn about the world firsthand. Back to the career with General Electric, my first assignment was with integrated circuits, and integrated circuits. At the time, this is 1970, in 1965, Gordon Moore had coined Moore's Law, where the density of chips doubles every year, which has proven true right to the present day. But being part of a system with Intel, AMD, Fairchild, Texas Instruments, National Semiconductor, it was just so exciting coming from UCD into this world. From integrated circuits, I was a district sales manager with General Electric in Oklahoma City for 2 years, and ditto in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And then I was promoted to product planner of the emerging optoelectronics business with the Semiconductor Products Department of GE. So that was 12 years with GE. Then I spent 8 years. I don't know whether this is part of the same question on career.
No, yes, yeah, okay. I think we can continue on with this. It's really interesting, yeah.
Okay. Then I spent 8 years with Legrand, Passon Seymour. What was interesting here, besides the fact that Legrand was a $6 billion company and very important to the economy in France, they acquired a smaller company, Passon Seymour in Syracuse, New York, $150 million business. But in doing so, I was recruited by David Ridings, who was the president, CEO of Passon Seymour. An interesting little twist here. And besides the fact that David was also the chair of the Syracuse Symphony Orchestra, good combination of engineering and music, David said, Basil, we have one requirement for you for this job, and that is we're an old electrical company in the CII market, which is commercial, institutional, industrial, where we make thousands, millions of these wall receptacles and switches. As an electrical business, we want you to develop the first electronic widget product. So for 3 months, I had all kinds of opportunities to look at different ways of doing things, knowing a very specific goal. Clearly it became, let's make an electronic version of that receptacle so that you can just plug a microprocessor-based sensitive equipment into the wall outlet, and you don't worry about it, whether you have a wall strip or a power cord or whatever the case may be. Having had the business plan approved, now my job was to prove the thesis. So I spent 18 months traveling the United States to the top 5 companies in the top 10 sectors. By that, Aoife, I mean hotels, airlines, government, fast food, banks, insurance companies. And I got to know how corporate America works. And the objective of this excursion, if you like, was to find out what features, functions, benefits the industry was looking for this new widget from a major company. In so doing, 2 of the examples, by the way, were at the White House. For some reason, Matthew McGuire, who was the facilities manager at the White House, learned that we were doing something new. And at the time, Ronald Reagan was known to have an awful temper, and his system was going down. Not his personal use, but the local area network was constantly going down from intermittent problems. So Matthew says, could your product have something to do with fixing this issue? Well, we ended up fixing the problem, not my product fixing it, but by the way we approached the problem. And we became the first site. So my new product was installed in the White House as the very first site. The second one was with McDonald's. Fernando Esparza was the chief electrical engineer at McDonald's. I worked for 18 months on this project with McDonald's. And Fernando, of course, was a member of the IEEE, as I was. And Fernando, we kind of developed this paper, which was Ghosts in the Drive-Thru. And what happened was this cash registers were opening at 8 o'clock on a Friday night, whatever the day or whatever the reason, and there were Panasonic cash registers, which were closed loop systems. So if one opens, they all open.
Okay.
And so they were just opening from a ping and no reason.
Yes.
So Fernando and I kind of addressed this situation and found out a police car was going off duty at 8 o'clock at night on Friday.
Every Friday.
Every Friday with their Motorola phones on.
Right.
And they come up to the drive-through. The phone is still on. The microprocessor was the same frequency as a cash register. Bingo! Just went. So these little things were creating an image that transient voltages are a big deal. At that time, I became very active in IEEE for the next 6 years. I was a task force chair for like 4 of those years. But in the working group for the new standard, ANSI IEEE C62.41, which is a very important standard for this new emerging sensitive equipment is growing, and the prevalence of interference issues are growing also. So in this working group, Aoife, it was unbelievable. We met 4 times a year for 5 years. And 4 of the members were former engineers on the Manhattan Project.
Wow.
I worked with Warren Lewis, with Fred Callback, with Tom Keyes, and from Sandia Labs, Livermore, and Francois Marcelov from National Institute of Science and Technology. Finally, in that grouping, I was asked by Francois Marcelov to be a panelist in 1989 at the ETH in Zurich, where Einstein went to school, of course. And in 1991, I was called back to give a paper, which is in the proceedings. If I can do this very quickly, we had 300 engineers for the presentation. At the start, I said, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions, ask them immediately without waiting towards the end. After 10 minutes, this guy had his hand up and I says, I'm going to need the chalkboard for this one. I had my hand out. Does anybody have a chalkboard? Piece of chalk? This lady comes over. She hands me a chalk and says, thank you. And just as I'm putting it, she pulls back, which was very embarrassing for me.
Yes, yeah.
And she said, be very careful. Einstein used that same chalkboard.
Okay.
And it will never be the same again. That was the highlight of my entire life,
Wow.
my entire career. So finally, I went from Passant Seymour Legrand to Arcom, who I work for today.
Yes,
26 years at Arcom Digital, private company. We make 2 systems. One is it's a passive radar system that pinpoints common path distortion, and other interferences on the network, on the cable TV network. And we also make a product, the way you can relate a little bit to this, and leakage on the cable TV system. As you know, when you go on the plane today, you have to put
Switch off
airplane
the phone,
mode.
yes,
And why could you interfere with the communication system on a plane? Well, the aeronautical frequency is the same frequency that, if you look back 30 years ago, there was an occurrence where Air Force One was rumored to have been almost in a crash. Now, that would have been a big deal because of interference with the communication system. It turned out that was only a rumor.
Okay.
And no plane has ever crashed. But this leakage subject has been very important in the industry, and recently in the last 10 years, for 4G LTE, it's not just interference on communication systems. You can have the same interference. A leak on the cable system can affect the coverage of the tower from an egress standpoint, and from an ingress standpoint can affect pixelation being caused in subscriber homes. So they're the two products we make. We pinpoint those leaks.
Looking at your career to date, it's very clear that you needed to have excellent technical skills, great communication skills, being able to think a little bit differently when trying to find problems like the police car is setting off all of these tills. So what kind of skills did you learn here at UCD that helped you in that career?
I think the skills that I learned, if it were as much, let's put it this way, on 3 of our staff, okay? I think the staff, the engineering staff, were one of the most reputable in the world. Well, we know Professor Morrissey was a worldwide expert on transmission line theory. Now, just taking a little snapshot of how their personality blended with the technology, because if you were accessible, matter of fact, smart, and enthusiastic, you can relate, because it's a kind of a given that you have the smarts to do the course, but you have to be driven on the different subjects. So with Professor Byrne, here's what he told us. He says, imagine you are standing on a rotor, like Evel Knievel or something like that, and you're looking at the windings of a stator depicting various force fields. And says, okay, going at 314 revolutions per minute. Okay, so I kept that in my mind. Professor Morrissey, again, looking at his credentials, but the way he expressed himself, he would come into the classroom with little notes spirally wound into buttonholes on his jacket. He has these notes to remind him to do certain things. And we're saying, that is very technological, and yet this guy is brilliant transmission line, engineer. But then the other thing that I always remember, his bushy eyebrows would always look up in determination at seeing a latecomer come in at the top row of theatres, 62 or 51, and you were in trouble if that happened. And then Professor McCabe, to him, everything was good stuff. It was like, whether it was enthalpy or entropy, or whether it was thermodynamics or fluid mechanics, it was all good stuff. So it was kind of infectious that you just related to the way you had the respect at the first of all, and the reputation, but the way they each presented themselves was wonderful. It's
that enthusiasm he brought to it as well. It's probably infectious for everybody there.
Absolutely.
Yes, yeah.
Absolutely.
And during your career, did you have any advisors or mentors along the way?
During my career, I think the melting pot concept, that you get involved in many, many things. For example, when I got to first year engineering, I wanted to get the full benefit of everything this melting pot was offering. And I joined the Literary and Historical Society. I gave my maiden speech, and I was in the company, Aoife, I'm looking back now, I was in the company of who's who in politics in Ireland. We had, that I got to know, John Bruton, Alan Dukes, Vincent Brown, Rory Quinn, Jerry Collins, on that side. Then I belonged to the Dramsoc, with Anthony Glavin, and Sinead Cusack, married to Jeremy Irons, and John O'Connor, the famous pianist. And then with the poetry workshop with Henry Kelly, and it was one of the founding members, Henry Kelly, Anthony Glavin, Jim Lockhart with Horselips. Then we had the literary engineers in Marion Street. And we talked a little bit about the engineering societies, but for a moment on Forum, does Forum exist today as a debating society, engineering debating society?
No, I don't think so, which is such a pity.
Yes, because besides the engineering that were focused more or less on engineering, and the LNH being, up in Earlsfort Terrace at the time, I was a kind of driver for Forum. Forum was a specifically engineering debating society.
Okay.
As a kind of a mirror to the LNH. And so and at the same time, I wrote poetry for University Gazette, for the St. Stephen's, which James Joyce also wrote. That was kind of, wow, I'm in the same magazine as Joyce. I was the main campus, the main university representative in Merrion Street for Campus magazine, did about a fortnightly article there. So this melting pot thing was belonging to me, it was as much of the development for a career tied in with my mentor, my cousin at Trinity, on this combining technology for business. I never looked back, Aoife. So I think in terms of mentoring me through the melting pot, if I were to mentor other students, don't just focus on your master's or your final thesis, for a number of reasons. One, acronyms that existed a month ago aren't even there anymore.
Yeah.
I've had experiences where I was trying to say, I keep forgetting that acronym, and somebody says, don't worry about it, it's gone. and with AI and with all the things that, and if you end up as an expert in one particular subject, then that subject may be gone as soon as anything.
So our students need to be flexible and agile and able to move from one thing. And they really should be taking advantage of that fact that a broad-based university like UCD gives them all those opportunities to not just be that straight, engineering person, but to move around.
Absolutely.
I think your words are very inspiring, I think, to a lot of students, and we need to get our students more involved in debating the way you would have been.
Thank you.
So that's very interesting to hear.
Thank you.
Thinking back to your time in engineering, obviously it wasn't here. We're on Belfield campus, which is a beautiful campus now, and it's lovely to have everybody together, but you were in the city centre in Merrion Street. What was that like? What was campus life like when there wasn't really a campus, I suppose?
Well, that's a great question, Aoife, because it was the dregs as far as the location. I mean, we're trying to, it's the office of the Taoiseach now, that building. But it was kind of draconian. We would look forward so much to the physiotherapist girls coming down once a week and the social science girls once a week, because otherwise it was all guys. We had one girl doing engineering in my stint, and so we lived at Earlsfort Terrace at every opportunity. Just, the literary engineers was a group of 7 or 8 engineers, including Pat Kenny, Brian Kenny, Eugene Cooney, Peter Ahern, Bernard Usher, Barry O'Connell, and Donald O'Rian, who, it's like, you mean you were doing engineering, but you guys are into the LNH, and we felt it was very important to our overall education. So Merrion Street was lab. Of course, we had the physics and chemistry lab in the first year out in Belfield, but and math physics in Earlsfort Terrace. But all the other lectures and lab practice were all in Merrion Street, and it was fun because we liked doing engineering.
Yes.
But that was not the melting pot.
Yes.
The melting pot was outside.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what the students probably have a little bit more of today.
Of course.
But you were also very involved in UCD engineering societies. I believe you were auditor of the Electrical Society, Electrical Engineering Society. Yeah. What did you do there, and why was that important to you?
Great question, Aoife. Thank you for asking, because it was kind of the love of my life, that particular period. There were a few things that happened during my term as auditor. One, of course, was organising the tour of, I had already been to IESTA, to Philips Eindhoven, and I arranged while I was there that, hey, will you invite 25 of my classmates for a tour of the Philips conglomeration? And so we set up, we were going to Amsterdam, and from there to Eindhoven, and from there to Cologne, and we needed X amount of pounds at the time. Now, this was a very exciting thing to be doing because we had 25 students. Well, we had like 10 weeks in order to to develop the funds that we needed. Well, after 8 weeks, we were nowhere near. And Professor Morrissey would have me in, like, how are we doing, Basil?
Okay.
We're getting late. Is an on or off? Well, I just persevered, Aoife. It was, of course we're on, even though it was all against us.
Yes.
We had just too much money. In the last 2 weeks, 2 people came along. One of them, I will tell you, Tony O'Reilly. He was with Heinz at the time, and we'd just come from O'Reilly Hall. But it was phenomenal. I mean, in fact, we ended up with more than we budgeted for the whole trip. So that was one thing about perseverance.
Yes.
Just keep at it. The second thing that was significant was, at the time, the government, the Irish government, the Higher Education Authority, was committed to invest in one new building, but there were 2 candidates, Trinity College Engineering and UCD Engineering. And the government made it very explicit, there will be one building. So the proposal was to merge the 2 universities. The assumption was that no big deal. You know, there's 2 engineering schools. One is smaller than the other, which is bigger. So the bigger swallows up the smaller. Until it became, wait a minute, do you guys realize that at Trinity College you get a humanities degree? Not really, it's one extra subject, but it's an arts degree with your engineering degree, which is a huge benefit, as we talked about this melting pot thing. So you end up doing an arts degree. So we went to Brian Lenihan, the Minister of Education, to participate in this debate. We were having a debate at the Irish Times. It was a full house. It was a front page story at the Irish Times at the time. But Brian Lenihan had declined to participate because it didn't have the sanction of the Higher Education Authority.
Okay.
We were just debating this. Well, how can
Yes.
you debate something that may go wrong? At the same time, Dr. O'Rafferty, who was chairman of the Higher Education Authority, he declined because this is too sensitive a subject. This is too delicate. I'm not going to get involved in that. So we said, okay, let's go ahead and do it. So we had the Dean Morrissey, and we had Dean Schaaf from Trinity, 4 staff from each university, 4 students from each university, and debate for 2 hours. Just, hey, this is where we need to be. Trinity students were so against losing, being swallowed up, and UCD just wanted it because we had nothing to lose.
Yeah.
It died. The whole subject died, and we each went our own way. But being part of that, I organised that debate, which was a huge event, and did have the prospects that it could lead to something, and so it was certainly very worthwhile doing. The other thing from the debating society, or from I kind of mentioned this a little bit about the Frank Flood Memorial Shield. At the time, the literary engineers and every other engineer, we're not trying to make a total distinction, but I am, to the extent that you've got a lot of study to do for engineering and you can't just screw around, do a lot of stuff. So you have to be very careful how you balance everything. But in my 3rd year, we had in the playoff competition debating, Chemical Engineering Society and Mechanical Engineering Society were going to debate a subject that was very controversial because it was the Time magazine story of the year, of the week or whatever, from Nietzsche, that God is dead. So that was going to be our thing. That was our debate. We were looking forward to it, and it was very competitive. While Dean M.A. Hogan heard about it, obviously, and said, I refuse to give permission because Frank Flood, who was a 2nd-year engineering student, who was executed by the British in 1921 for an ambush against the Black and Tans that didn't result in any fatalities, but he was executed. And Professor Hogan felt that it was disrespectful and that it was irreverent to debate such a subject that should be debated by students of philosophy and theology.
Okay.
And it was deferred to the LNH. Well, we just felt we lost out on this. I mean, the subject was debated, and it was our theme, and so that was just focusing more on why we needed debating societies like Forum.
Okay.
Okay.
What's your fondest memory of UCD?
My fondest memory of UCD, well, it almost goes back to my very first day. My very first day, October 13, 1964, I believe, 6 of us from the country got lost on our way to the first lecture. It was M.A. Hogan who was giving the first lecture. We wwent to Belfield, then to Worldsford Terrace, never getting anywhere. And of course, and the first lecture, you're very nervous. You don't want to miss the first lecture. And it was, and the jokes from the Dubliners, of course, these culchies, they get lost in the upstairs of a double-decker bus trying to find the exit. It was a little bit embarrassing, but there were 2 Dubs who got lost too. But my point here, Aoife, is that these 6 or 7 became best friends all my life for 55 years.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
And the other thing we do, there's a group, my 10 best college friends. We go away twice a year for to a different city, just for 4 days, and just do what lads do. While in Ireland, another 10 from the class do the same in the west of Ireland.
Okay.
The other part of it is the Common. The Common, the Engineers Club, has been hugely significant in my memories and in my life. When I left UCD in the first, I was coming back frequently because GE had 2 plants in Ireland, EI and Echo and Dundalk. So anytime I was back, and then when Barry Walsh was back, or then Micheál O'Leary was back, or then when any of the class was back, you get on the phone and say, so-and-so's back. Let's see who we can round up for the Common.
Yeah.
Well, I remember as the years went by, once we had 2, and another time we had 29. And that the Common, before WhatsApp and before the internet and before, the Common was the way of staying in touch. Yeah. Email soon afterwards, WhatsApp soon afterwards, and then Zoom. Zoom became a real great, a great way of staying in touch, because certainly through COVID times, but even before, slightly before COVID and after COVID, but Zoom enabled us to stay in touch until after about 7 or 8 weeks of communicating twice a month on Zoom. How often can you talk about the weather? You know, what did you do?
There's nothing happening in your life during the pandemic.
Exactly. So we had this idea. Look, let's designate one of the team, and there's the master list is about 35. One of the team to give a PowerPoint presentation on his life, on his career. So 30 of us wrote 2, 3, 4-page essays on what we've done for 50 years. And one of the benefits of that we felt, going back to why did you do engineering? Why did I do engineering? Well, I had a fairly good idea, but my dad was a lawyer. I wanted to be a lawyer. And if I were going to do law, I'd have to go back to Ballina, and I didn't want to do that, take over his practice. Sure. So I'll do engineering, but I didn't really know I had these 2 confidants. But as we look at this book that 30 of us put together of why we did engineering and how we ended up, it's like if I had access to that today, I'd say, oh my goodness, here are some wonderful ideas. And you know what? Even if I don't like engineering, I can switch to finance or IT.
Yes.
Or one guy is full-time carpenter now, another is an artist. So that was the first time I had seen such a long duration of 50 years filled with multiplicity of different ways of going from an engineering degree into a career, into life.
It's really interesting how you've stayed in contact, because that's unusual. A lot of our alumni don't stay in contact so well as you do. If you're looking at our students coming out today, how can they keep that kind of momentum going? What would you recommend that they should do to stay in contact for the next 50 years?
Well, Aoife, that's a great question. I think if you look on, or if I look on some of the things that we did, first of all, we expanded our horizons. We didn't just study engineering, but engineering was our goal. Engineering was our career. And it wasn't just about money, the money you get as an engineer. It wasn't, it was a matter of expanding your horizons and your opportunities, learning to interact, back to this melting pot thing.
Yes.
And I think there's no better definition of a university than that melting pot. Many people get together to share ideas and smarts and dreams. And so I would just say that it's very difficult because of the competitive nature of engineering today. I'm not saying drop your, your Saturday night studies and go out and have a few pints. I'm just saying during college, there are massive amounts of societies, of ways to improve yourself, to skills to learn. And I would think that engineers probably do less of that than most other disciplines.
How do you stay connected in with UCD then?
Staying connected with the UCD is kind of like on a personal level in many ways. As I was saying earlier, many of my trips back I would visit with Professor Tom Galler and Professor Vinnie McCabe. I had a lot of papers published. I had at one point in time, I was in the proceedings at Zurich on that ETH paper. Also at National Institute of Standards and Technology, I did a paper for the Association for the Advancement of Medical Instrumentation. I gave a paper for the Television Symposium in Montreux. On the speaker side, I've spoken at Prague and Budapest and Manila and London at various conferences. And on the journal standpoint, I've been writing for 50 years for the SCAT magazine in India, for the Technology Exchange in China, for International Cable Magazine, and for the IBBL, the International Broadband, which is part of the Society of Cable Telecommunications Engineers. Now, through all of this, I became a life member of IEEE and a fellow of the Society of Cable Telecommunication Engineers. But without this broad experience in enhancing my engineering degree, I would have lacked confidence, I think. I would have lacked leadership skills. I think I would have lacked communication skills. I don't know if I've totally off track.
No, that's fine. I think we're going to move on to a topic that I know is really interesting, that you're really interested in, and that you have almost a personal campaign about, which is women in engineering, and that you organised a Zoom conversation recently with some of your colleagues around this. So in UCD, we're very proud of what we've done so far. I think I was saying this to you earlier, that we have about 30% of our students are now female. We have a lot of female faculty. So of the 5 engineering schools, 3 are led by women, which is quite different from probably the 1960s when there was only one woman in your class.
Of course.
But there's still problems. And I'd really like to hear your perspective on how we might be able to encourage more women to come into engineering, and what industry and university might be able to do to keep them there once they're working.
Of course. Well, one of the ways, Aoife, I would just kind of jump in a little bit on something we did talk about the engineering societies inviting guests from outside. Yes. Now, let me make the preface here that on STEM, of course, because I have every confidence, and I'm so impressed with the number of female engineers. You blew my mind there. I had no idea. I thought it was, much, much lower than that. So I'm very impressed with that. The nature of STEM, I think, will be the huge answer that it's certainly not a matter of qualification. Women are as qualified as men in all of these categories, and have proven so, and all studies show that. There's a macho image about engineering. There's a boys' club image about engineering. There's that, let's bring the girls in, but then let's give them subordinate roles, and let's not treat them as full-time team members. And when you look at the opportunity for parents or schools, and they don't promote female engineers, because why would they? Because they're just not inclined that way, the way the system is set up on this old boys' school. So I would think that all of the engineering societies, electrical, mechanical, civil, having accessibility to leaders in industry to bring more in and give talks at what they do, telecommunications or IT or whatever their careers are, and spread the word. I think when I traveled across China for 5 years with 3 other companies, including Corning and Cisco, giving seminars in small cities, and then we'd end up at the big city where the main telecommunications conference was, that invariably the chief engineer in these small cable TV systems are Madame Chief Engineer. And when I heard that first, I was impressed, but then it was like very often I says, this is really great. So why do you have more engineering managers that are female in China and perhaps in the Middle East as well? That's an issue I don't know the answer to. But I do have, and then the other part about the role model. I mean, we've got so many role models of men in engineering. But one that comes to mind for females, nobody really heard of today because it was in the 50s, but yet Heidi Lamar was an electrical engineer. She got the patent for spread spectrum, frequency hopping, for noise mitigation, for signal processing. Hugely, wow, you mean this female, this very attractive girl, we thought she was just a movie star. No, she's an engineer. If we had more role models to compare to, and we do have those in science, you know,
yeah.
but we don't. So I think by promoting that, but I do have one paragraph that Peter Ahern, whose niece is your namesake, Aoife Ahern, and he just sent me a paragraph that I just thought, if I may, because he actually moderated the Zoom on women in engineering. So I thought I might just read that. Basil and Peter. Okay, here we go. Can't believe it came up so fast. These things don't come up like that. Okay, and you know the topic, women in engineering. However, a significant probable factor is a serious lack of understanding among school teachers and guidance counselors regarding the roles that engineers play in business and industry, leaving girls with little encouragement, support, or information to consider engineering as a profession. This deficit could be addressed through a sustained campaign aimed at schools and teachers to show the real-life impact of engineers on society and to showcase engineering as a fulfilling and stimulating career. UCD may already have channels for such a campaign through its relationship with the secondary level system. However, an obvious option is the use of social media, where a sustained campaign, say weekly postings on 2 or 3 of the major social media channels featuring, say, vignettes of women engineers and their work, can be done at low cost, including development of weekly postings. As Peter says, my little company does this at modest cost. I think it's kind of complicated because it's I've already made up my mind on that. I'm interested in enough career opportunities. Why should I bother in one that's got so much negative feedback over the years? So there's a huge education.
I think there's a matter of having to get in early to these schools to change that mindset, but not just amongst the girls themselves, but amongst their parents and the people who are influencing them at that point, and then to bring them on. Because I think we've got a lot of role models at this point, maybe in Ireland in particular, with our president is Orla Feely is an electronic engineer, and we have a lot of leadership in engineering here as well. But I think we need to get those stories out there as well. So I agree with a lot of what you say and what Peter says as well on this. Wow. I'm going to move on to my final couple of questions now, and that's looking at the students that are coming out now. And they're coming out as very qualified, very skillful engineering students. But what kind of things do you think employers want from our engineering students? What do we need to do to get them better prepared for careers like yours, for example?
Well, Aoife, I think the answer there goes back to the acronym subject. And I'm very serious about that it was, in my industry, the amounts of acronyms are just mind-boggling. But they disappear. The technology changes, constantly changes, and technologies die. And again, we get into this whole AI subject. Where are we going to be if we're having this talk in 10 years' time? So I would think that the broadening of one's skills in order to be more flexible, it's kind of should all engineers be CEOs? Not necessarily, but should they all have the capability to be a CEO? Yes, I would say. And I don't think we're developing enough of those extraneous types of other interests that could support what the industry is looking for today. I don't think the industry is looking so much for somebody who's done this unique thesis in final year, or this master's project on something that is so wonderful that it's not flexible. It's too niche. So I think to a certain extent, I'd be more concerned with bringing somebody in. Right now, my company, we bring in a number of intern electrical engineering students from Syracuse University with the hope that they will be permanent afterwards. And then we kind of teach them our ambience. But I think it's very important to develop these for the individual students to be more well-rounded and more intellectual curiosity with respect to other aspects of this great melting pot where you have the opportunity for 4 years and you won't have it all your life. But by focusing on that master's, that isn't going to get it with every employer.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's very thought-provoking to take away from today's interview, that we're looking at our students being more than just the technical engineer, to be that well-rounded individual who could do critical thinking, who could be nimble and agile and move and adapt to careers as the world around them changes as well. And obviously you're an example of someone who's done that very successfully over your career. So thank you very much for taking the time. It's been very enjoyable, and there's a lot of thought-provoking things that we can take out of this today for myself and for our students.
Thank you
Basil.
for taking the time, Aoife.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.